If there's one thing I've learned about George Clooney over the last 10 years, he really, really loves making movies about outer space. What's going on, you guys? James here with another Real Review, and today I'm diving into Netflix's The Midnight Sky, directed by George Clooney and starring George Clooney himself, Kyle Chandler, David Oyelowo, and even Felicity Jones. Thank you so much to Netflix for sending me a screener for review. The movie drops on Wednesday, so I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about it. Now guys, before I tell you what I liked and didn't like about this movie, if it's your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I review movies like this all the time, so stay with me on this journey to 5,000 subscribers and hit the big red button below. Tap on the bell so you don't miss out on any new content, just like my Wonder Woman 1984 review dropping this Wednesday. And if you haven't already, guys, smash that like button and get loud in the comments again when you see this movie. Let me know what you thought. Did you like it or did you not? Alrighty, so guys, let's dive into this film. And the first positive that jumped off the screen to me was, man, this has a very interesting premise. The film follows a scientist named Augustine, played by George Clooney, and after a global catastrophe in the Arctic, he has to fight to contact a crew of astronauts with one message: don't return to Earth. Now that sounds both intense and also incredibly emotional. He's a lone survivor, and he has to contact one astronaut crew so many miles away to let them know don't return home, the place that they were fighting to get back to in the first place. And I'll say it one more time, guys, here's a film that, again, I wish I could see on the big screen. There is this sense of immersion that I did have with it at home, so if you do watch it at home, get it on the biggest screen possible. Blast it, well, not too loud, you want to have your hearing for the rest of the year, but make sure it's played on some beautiful sound, and trust me, I think you'll be just as immersed in that first act. And then when it comes to how the film looks, this is a visually impressive film. George Clooney has proven himself time and time again that he can direct the heck out of a film. Good Night and Good Luck is one of my favorite movies of all time, and he did such a great job shooting that film all in black and white, and it just made a huge difference, and I thought it looked great, and the end product was even better. And here in The Midnight Sky, there's some really stunning cinematography. Whether it be George Clooney underwater or blood floating in space, trust me, it will make sense when you watch it. Here's a film that is not lacking in how it looks. It's aesthetically pleasing. And besides the story being interesting and the film looking beautiful, it's Alexander Desplat's score that is just so wonderful and helps you get immersed into the film. There are times where I felt like I was floating in outer space, and I'm just in my room, not really in outer space at all, but it makes you feel like you're in the moment with our astronaut crew or back on Earth with Augustine. So it's a movie that is really aided by a lot of the technical aspects, but when you get to the core of the film, guys, here is where the movie gets a little weak for me. I just don't think The Midnight Sky is ever fully realized as a film. It has a lot of potential, and we just talked about how good the story sounds, but a lot of that potential is untapped. There are so many misfires here, and the story structure doesn't always aid the storytelling either. For example, we get these flashbacks of young Augustine in the first act and then sprinkled throughout the film, but again, the movie doesn't really flesh that out. They just throw them at us, and they, of course, are trying to get us to understand Augustine as a character, but I came away from the movie never feeling much of a connection with Augustine because of those flashbacks. And speaking of structure, this is a movie that is a tale of two halves, with both halves feeling like two entirely different movies. There is this moment in the middle of the movie where I felt, are we never going to go back and visit Augustine in the Arctic? Like, it just seems like, to me, the film strayed away from what made it really interesting in the first place. A lot of the transitions between space and back on Earth could have been executed better, but instead we get a movie that's really lopsided. Then there's this pacing issue where I felt like the film was going back and forth, where there's a lot of intensity, which is great, but then it's almost always followed up by another scene that kind of takes you down, and it brings you off that high and doesn't really provide a lot of substance. So while the film is aesthetically pleasing, there's not a lot of meat in the middle. And outside of some scenes feeling out of place, a huge reason why the second half of this movie never struck a chord with me was because I never felt connected with our crew in space. Felicity Jones and David Oyelowo actually lead our supporting cast here alongside Kyle Chandler, Damian Butcher, and Tiffany Boone. All of them are good actors and actresses, but I never felt that deep emotional connection with them, and that's because the film is yelling at us to cry. I mean, the score at some points is really overbearing, even though it's really good for the most part. It just sort of tells you this is where you should tear up now. And I never got emotional, and that's because the connection was never strong, and the writing for our astronaut crew felt a little by the wayside. And not only did I not resonate with anyone in space, I didn't even resonate with George Clooney's role because it just wasn't all that convincing. And I get that the film is trying to hit a home run, especially at the end, and I was waiting for this movie to just click. But none of it was that deep, and I think the film wanted to be a little bit more introspective than it made itself out to be, and I really never resonated with this film. So yes, I was uninterested for most of the movie. There were some pros, there were just a lot of cons that outweighed all the positives in this movie, and The Midnight Sky ended up being really disappointing. I wanted to really stay with George Clooney on Earth as much as possible because learning about his character, understanding who he is as a person was really cool. But then when we go to space, it seems like a CGI fest, and unfortunately that's where we get most of the action, but it's never anything that made me want to like hold the edge of my chair. And I was just sitting back thinking, man, I want to go back to George Clooney's character. The moment where I began to scratch my head, honestly guys, was where the space repair sequence happened. Why did the story need to depart for almost 30 minutes away from George Clooney's character? We go to space, and then we hear them go through this really long rendition of Sweet Caroline, and yeah, it wasn't like 4 or 5 minutes long, but it just felt like it dragged on, and I did not really care too much for that moment, and unfortunately it came at a part where, wow, we needed to get that home run hitter. I needed to feel like the rising action was paying off, but unfortunately when we get to that peak, it didn't feel like much of a peak at all. So overall, you guys, The Midnight Sky is one film that has so much untapped potential. Here's a movie that presents a very compelling premise, but it misfires so often. George Clooney is not a bad director, but here I couldn't necessarily tell where he wanted to go. Is this supposed to be a survival story about our lone scientist, or were we supposed to feel like we were part of this astronaut crew? Because it was just too much to put into one film, and it left me thinking, okay, you gotta give us one or the other, because having 2 movies in one didn't work. At times, tones were jarring, and even the pacing of the film felt off. So where we got a lot of the intrigue in this film, at least where I felt most interested, it happened so briefly, and everything that followed was a little lackluster. And here's a movie that looks beautiful, but with all of that aesthetic comes little substance. And this is coming from a guy who loved Gravity, okay? And Gravity didn't have much going on at all. It was a very simple movie for the most part. And The Midnight Sky tries to almost replicate that success here, and it just doesn't work for me. Unfortunately, this is a film where I was gonna give it like that 70%. But I would think that this falls into that 2.5 star out of 5 category because yes, there is a good foundation, but unfortunately nothing that's built on top of that is worthwhile. So there you have it guys, that is my real review of The Midnight Sky, a disappointing film, one that has a lot of potential but again falls short of the mark. Now I want to hear what you have to say about this movie, so go ahead and get loud in the comments below, smash that like button if you haven't already guys, and go ahead and hit the big red button below so you don't miss out on my review of Wonder Woman 1984. Am I going to love it, or am I going to really be disappointed with that film too? I hope it's the former, not the latter. Alrighty guys, well I'm going to go get ready for it. I'm going to rewatch Wonder Woman. Man, what a great film. Again, thank you so much for watching guys, and I'll catch you at the next screening.